More than a month after the September election that saw German Chancellor Angela Merkel's CDU return to power, albeit with a reduced vote, making it fit only for a coalition, Berlin is still without a government. But the inability of the world's most powerful woman to form a strong coalition has evoked not empathy, but the hopes of some countries. After refusing to form a coalition with its erstwhile partner, Mrs. Merkel again, the Social Democrats are currently under pressure, both from the head of state, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, himself a former SPD politician, and within its own ranks, to do so in the name of stability in Europe's most powerful country. But if that doesn't work, then Germany will be in a state of limbo for at least 6 months before a fresh election can be held. Senior foreign editor Padma Rao looks at who's happy at Berlin's woes, who's not, and why.
The Germans have evocative words to describe moods and emotions. One such is Kummer. It means grief, distress. Take the United States. Just when President Donald Trump thought he was on a good wicket with Europe's powerfrau Angela Merkel, there's crisis in Germany. The two countries seemed in sync over Russia's belligerence. Germany has committed more than $4 billion to NATO. It's positioned Typhoon jets and is commanding a 1,200-man battalion in Latvia and Lithuania. A weak government in the heart of Europe, or one dependent on anti-NATO, anti-Europe oppositional groups, would be the last thing Washington wants. Then there's the European Union itself. Germany is the EU's most powerful economy and the glue that holds it together, especially in the face of rising nationalism and calls to dissolve it. Any prolonged political paralysis in Berlin will mean that the forthcoming Brexit talks with Britain will be an uphill task. If Brexit was the cause for greater cohesiveness between European countries, Berlin's weakness could mean the opposite, instability. But one man's pain is another's pleasure, or to put it more accurately, Schadenfreude. This German word means pleasure at someone else's pain, and there are at least two countries indulging in it. One is Russia, already accused of meddling in domestic matters from the United States elections to Catalan separatism in Spain. Moscow would welcome any opportunity to destabilize Europe. And if it self-destructs without Moscow having to soil its fingers and reputation, as Berlin seems to be doing, then the Schadenfreude can only be greater. But the country that's happiest seems the United Kingdom. Struggling to bargain over the high cost of Brexit, it now sees an excuse to stall talks until a German government is formed. The deal over Brexit could be flawed if Germany is unable to contribute its thoughts. And finally, political instability in Germany could damage the relationship between London and Berlin even further. But the Germans also invented the word Hartnäckigkeit, determination, and going by the parleys in the corridors of power in the German capital right now, the two biggest parties, the SPD and Chancellor Merkel's CDU, may bury their differences and come together yet again in a coalition stronger than one possible between any of the other parties. And that will be what the Germans call Durchbruch, or a breakthrough. Padma Rao, WION.
And joining us on the broadcast is WION's senior foreign editor, Padma Rao, who also filed that story for us. Padma, how big a trouble Berlin finds itself in?
Well, it's certainly a very unusual situation. It's the first time this is happening in Germany's post-World War history. So naturally they are anxious, and also the German constitution does not allow for an election, a repeat of an election, to take place quite so quickly. So there will be, if they do decide to go in for a fresh election, then it will not happen before May or June next year, which means that not only Germany will be in a state of limbo, they won't be able to pass a budget, they won't be able to do much except perhaps disburse salaries and, routine things like that. And certainly the European Union and talks on Brexit will suffer, because Germany's presence is very much required. And what we will be having up to May and June is what is essentially a caretaker government. That is the current government, or rather the last government of Chancellor Merkel. So but the danger seems to be very slight right now, Raghavendra, because the SPD's Chancellor candidate, Mr. Martin Schulz, Scholz initially was quite vehemently against, re-entering a coalition with the CDU-CSU of Chancellor Angela Merkel. But he is, even as we speak, he has spoken to Frank-Walter Steinmeier, the president, who happens to be from the same party, from the Social Democrats, and Mr. Steinmeier has made it very clear that he is not going to support fresh elections, and that Germany's two largest parties, the CDU-CSU Union and the SPD, must enter, talks again to prevent this kind of national and Europe-wide embarrassment to its most powerful economy and form a government come what may. Now, having said that, there will be a certain level of disappointment among the voters, because don't forget, both these parties had their worst results at the poll in September since, in the post-World War era. And the votes they lost are what went to the opposition and right-wing nationalist groups like the Alternative für Deutschland. So the voters who turned away from that coalition are likely to be very annoyed and very disappointed that yet again they're going to see the CDU-CSU and the SPD come together. But having said that, in the name of stability, I think most Germans, including those who dislike both these parties, would welcome this step, because, as I said, it's been a very unclear situation since the election.
Right. You made a very interesting point, Padma, that the voters would feel let down by the current scenario. But how real is the possibility of a coalition, a stable coalition at that, finally working out? And if that doesn't happen, as you mentioned, fresh elections cannot happen before 6 months. Presuming Germany goes to polls again 6 months from now, what kind of a scenario we could be expecting then?
Well, it's as I said, even that is very fluid. The SPD, for instance, one of the arguments that is being heard within the Social Democrat circles is a lot of criticism of Mr. Martin Schulz for his initial reluctance and vehemence against re-entering a coalition with Chancellor Angela Merkel. Now, that has changed. His own party members are telling him that he should not do that, because were the SPD to risk another election, it might even, end up doing worse than it did in September. The same with the CDU, though with the CDU, I think if anyone has been seen as a pillar of stability during all these shenanigans over the last 1.5 months and attempts at coalition building, it has been Chancellor Angela Merkel. And she has said right from the beginning that she's open to talking to anyone except the extreme right-wing Alternative für Deutschland. So she has done her bit. She has spoken to two other parties, the FDP and the Greens, and that, didn't work out. Now, the party that's also likely to receive much more egg on its face than it already has is the FDP, the youthful Mr. Christian Lindner, who made, an announcement when he broke talks on Sunday, saying that he'd rather not rule at all than rule imperfectly. Now, for a party that returned to power after sitting it out for, a long period by not making even the 5% to enter elections, that was a very lofty statement to make. And his voters, the voters that propped this party to such a stupendous victory and made them re-enter parliament, those guys are going to be really disappointed and annoyed with the Free Liberals, because they made it back to parliament and yet they have withdrawn of, and pulled back from the coalition building.